When my daughter called me old and pathetic, I didn't answer her right away. Not because I didn't have words, but because my heart was too full of them. And none could make it past my throat. You see, there's a silence that follows deep pain. It isn't empty, it's heavy. It hums inside your ribs like a trapped bird. That day, as she stood in my kitchen, her eyes rolling with disgust, I realized I was looking into the eyes of a stranger I had once carried beneath my heart. She was wearing a silk blouse. The kind I used to save up to buy her for school presentations. Her hair, sleek and straight, fell like the curtain between us. And her words tore something that had taken me decades to build. "Mom," she said, her tone sharp like glass. "You live like it's still the 90s. You're old, you're sad, and honestly, you're just pathetic." I remember the clink of the teaspoon I was holding as it fell into my cup. The tea splashed over the rim, staining the white saucer. Like a wound that had been waiting to bleed. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at her and thought, where did I go wrong? I had been up since 5 that morning. My knees ached, but I still swept the front porch, cooked her favorite lentil soup, and ironed her shirt for work, because she'd left it wrinkled in the dryer. That was my way of saying I love you. Quietly, invisibly, like mothers do. And she repaid me with cruelty dressed as confidence. I could have told her that I'd once been full of dreams. That before the lines and the gray hair, I was a woman who could dance barefoot in the rain. But that day, she wouldn't have heard me. Her world had no space for the woman who raised her. Only for the woman she wanted to become. So, I stood there, in my own kitchen, feeling like a guest in my daughter's life. I watched her pick up her phone, scroll through it, and sigh with annoyance at the sight of my trembling hands. "Mum," she said again, softer now, but not kinder. "You can't just live here forever, you know. I have plans. You need to think about other arrangements." "Other arrangements," I repeated quietly. She nodded. "Yeah, maybe a small flat somewhere. Or," her pause cut me like a blade, "an assisted living place." I looked at her. My only child, the one I'd walked through storms for. And I saw nothing of myself in her face anymore. Her words echoed in my head, mixing with the ticking clock on the wall, and the faint hiss of the kettle. And in that small, cruel moment, I realized something that broke me. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was someone the world had hardened. Someone who saw love as weakness and age as shame. When she left that afternoon, slamming the door behind her, the air inside the house changed. It was quieter. Colder. I sat down at the table, still staring at her untouched bowl of soup. That soup had been simmering for hours. With lentils, tomatoes, and a little bit of ghee. Just the way she liked it when she was 10. Back then, she used to say, "Mom, your food tastes like home." And now, she had no appetite for it, or for me. I sat there until the light began to fade, until the walls turned amber and the silence grew unbearable. Then I whispered to no one, "Old and pathetic." The words stung like salt in an open wound. It wasn't just what she said. It was the truth she believed in it. To her, my years were a burden. My sacrifices invisible. My love outdated. I thought about the nights I spent awake when she had a fever, counting her breaths under the soft light of a night lamp. I thought about the day I sold my wedding bangles to pay her university deposit. And I thought about the countless moments I had chosen her happiness over my dignity. And now, she looked at me and saw a woman past her expiration date. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the small house. Touching the photo frames on the walls, the faded curtains, the clock that had ticked through all our laughter and arguments. Every corner held a memory. Of her first steps, her birthday cakes, her teenage tantrums. And now, all of it felt like evidence of a crime I didn't know I'd committed. I stood before the mirror, the same old mirror with its slight crack on the edge, and looked at myself. My reflection stared back, tired but steady. I saw the wrinkles, the sagging skin, the gray hair. But I also saw something else, a flicker of strength that hadn't yet died. That's when I whispered to my reflection, maybe she's right. Maybe I am old. But pathetic. No, not yet. It wasn't defiance. It was a quiet promise, to myself. Because if the world was going to measure my worth by youth and usefulness, then I'd have to redefine both. And that was the beginning of everything that followed. Because my daughter, in her arrogance, had just awakened a part of me I had buried long ago. The woman I used to be before life made me small for everyone else's comfort. She thought she had dismissed me. But she had unknowingly set in motion the very story that would teach her the greatest lesson of her life. I wasn't always this lonely. There was a time when laughter filled every corner of this house. A time when my daughter, Alina, would come running into the kitchen with her hair in ribbons, smelling of baby powder and sunlight. Back then, she couldn't sleep unless her tiny hand rested in mine. She'd whisper, "Don't leave, Mama." And I'd promise, "Never, my love. I'm right here." And I meant it. With every breath, with every dream I ever dared to have, I meant it. Her father, Hamid, was a man of few words. Kind at first, like the world promised us happiness in small doses. But over the years, his silence turned into something heavier, a distance that filled the house like a fog. He wasn't cruel, no. Just absent, even when he was home. His mind was always somewhere else. The factory, the bills, the disappointments he didn't know how to share. I learned early that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hides behind small gestures. So I became the bridge between him and our daughter. I became the laughter when he couldn't smile, the softness when he was stern. When Alina was 10, I started working part-time at a small tailoring shop. My hands were quick, and I found peace in the rhythm of the needle, in turning plain fabric into something beautiful. I'd save a few rupees every week in a small tin box under the bed. My dream was to buy Alina a bicycle. The pink one with the white basket she kept staring at in the shop window on our way to school. I still remember the day I gave it to her. She screamed with joy, threw her arms around my neck, and said, "You're the best mom in the world." For that one moment, every sacrifice was worth it. But time has a way of dulling sweetness. When she turned 13, things began to change. The laughter turned into sighs, the hugs into slammed doors. She started comparing. Her friends' fathers bought them phones, designer clothes, fancy school trips. I couldn't give her those. "Why can't you and Dad try harder?" she asked once, tears of frustration glistening in her eyes. "Other parents make it work." I didn't tell her how many nights I'd skip dinner, so she could have extra milk in the morning. I didn't tell her about the bills stacked under my pillow, the ones I pretended didn't exist. I just said, "We're doing our best, love." But she wasn't old enough to understand that sometimes, best isn't enough for the world. Hamid left when she was 16. It wasn't sudden. It was the end of a slow unraveling. One morning he packed a small suitcase, kissed Alina's forehead, and said, "I'll send money when I can." Then he was gone. No explanations, no goodbye to me, just gone. That day, I didn't cry in front of her. I couldn't. She needed strength, not sorrow. So I worked double shifts, stitching until my fingers bled. I made sure she stayed in school, no matter what it took. And for a while, she seemed to see my effort. She helped around the house, studied hard, even hugged me on her graduation day. But when university came, everything shifted again. She got into a private college, the kind that smells of perfume and privilege. I couldn't afford it, but she begged me not to make her go somewhere cheap. So I sold my wedding jewelry, every last piece, and took a small loan. I told her it was worth it, that she deserved every opportunity. She never knew how much it cost me, not just in money, but in pride. I wore fake bangles after that, smiling when people complimented them. I kept the truth hidden, the way mothers often do. At university, she grew distant. Calls became short, visits became rare. She started speaking in English even at home, correcting my pronunciation with an impatient smile. "Mom, it's schedule, not schedule," she'd say laughing. I'd laugh too, pretending it didn't sting. I watched her change. New clothes, new friends, new accent. And slowly, I became the shadow in her world of bright lights. When she got her first job, she didn't tell me until weeks later. She came home one evening, dropped her bag, and said, "I'm working now." At an advertising firm, it's fast-paced, Mom. You wouldn't understand. Her tone wasn't cruel, just careless. But sometimes carelessness hurts more than cruelty. I cooked her favorite meal that night. Biryani with raisins, the way she liked it when she was a child. But she came home late, smelling of coffee and exhaustion. She took one look at the table and said, "Mom, I'm on a diet. You really shouldn't make such heavy food." Then she walked into her room and shut the door. I sat there staring at the untouched plate. The food grew cold, so did something inside me. She began earning more than I ever had. I was proud, truly, but pride can be a double-edged sword, because the more she succeeded, the smaller I felt in her eyes. She started correcting the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I thought. "Mom, you're too emotional. Mom, stop worrying about people. Mom, that's not how the world works anymore." I used to think wisdom came with age. But she made me feel like wisdom was a flaw. There were small humiliations, the kind you can't complain about, because they sound too trivial to matter. Like how she'd take calls in front of me, referring to me as the old lady to her friends. Or how she'd roll her eyes when I asked her to have dinner with me. Or how she started locking her bedroom door, as if I, her mother, were an intruder. Still, I tried to understand. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she just needed space. So I made myself smaller, quieter. I learned to tiptoe around her moods, to be grateful for the rare moments she smiled at me. And when she got promoted, I baked her a cake, my hands shaking from excitement. She came home late again, distracted, half listening as I sang, "Congratulations." Then she looked at the cake, frowned, and said, "Mom, this is sweet of you. But this frosting looks kind of old-fashioned." She laughed, but I didn't. That night I cried quietly into my pillow, not because of her words, but because of what I knew deep down. I had raised her to reach for the stars, but in doing so, I had taught her to forget the ground she came from. When her company offered her a better position in another city, she didn't ask, she announced it. "Mom, I'm moving. You'll be fine, right?" She said it like I was a pet she was leaving with enough food and water. I smiled and said, "Of course, my love, because mothers say yes even when their hearts scream no." She visited less and less after that. Calls turned into text messages. Texts turned into emojis. And when she did come home, it was as if she was visiting out of obligation, not affection. She'd bring expensive gifts, perfumes, handbags, gadgets, but never time. I kept her room just the way she left it. The posters, the books, even the pink bicycle I had refused to throw away. It was my way of believing she'd return, not just physically, but emotionally. But she didn't. The distance between us wasn't miles anymore. It was pride. And then one day, she called me, her voice full of the kind of confidence that sounds like a wall. "Mom," she said, "I think you should come stay with me for a while. You'll have company, and it'll be easier to take care of things." My heart leapt. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe she misses me. I packed my things. Just a suitcase of clothes, my sewing box, and the framed photo of her as a baby. When I arrived, her apartment was beautiful, all glass and silver, smelling of air freshener instead of home. She hugged me briefly, already checking her phone. And for the first few weeks, I told myself this was love. Her kind of love, busy and distracted. But slowly, I began to realize I was no guest. I was a burden she was learning to manage. The whispers, the impatience, the rolling eyes. The small corrections turned into complaints. Until one afternoon, standing in that sleek kitchen with my old hands shaking over a pot of soup, she looked at me with disgust and said those words I'll never forget. "You're old and pathetic." And in that moment, every sacrifice I had ever made, every sleepless night, every empty stomach, every silent prayer, came crashing down in front of me like broken glass. At first, I told myself she didn't mean it, that it was just frustration. The kind that slips out when life gets too busy, too loud. For the first few days after she called me old and pathetic, I moved around the apartment like a ghost trying not to startle the living. I'd wake before her alarm, quietly sweep the kitchen, make her breakfast, and leave it on the counter with a note that said, "Eat something, Beta." Most mornings, she didn't. She'd rush past me in heels that clicked like judgment, her perfume trailing behind. That cold, expensive kind that smells like ambition, not comfort. "Mom, you don't have to wait up for me," she'd say without looking up from her phone. But I waited anyway. Every night. Because waiting is what mothers do best. I learned to measure her moods by the way she shut the door when she came home. A gentle close meant she was tired but kind. A loud slam meant I should disappear into my room until morning. One night, she came in furious. She threw her bag onto the sofa and kicked off her shoes. I peeked from the kitchen doorway and asked softly, "Roth day?" She glared at me like I'd just insulted her. "Mom, please. I can't have this right now. Every time I come home, you're just hovering. Can't you do something else with your time?" "Something else?" I repeated quietly. "Yeah," she said, sighing. "A hobby, or I don't know, go for walks. Join a senior group or something." Her words were sharp, but her tone was worse, pity. Like I was some lonely stranger cluttering her perfect life. That night, I went to bed early, pretending to sleep. But I heard her laughing on the phone with someone. Her voice was light, warm, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I caught a few words. "She's sweet, but clueless. Like a lost child." And then laughter. Hers, and someone else's. That laughter echoed in my mind for days. I stopped leaving her breakfast notes, stopped waiting up. But the more I pulled away, the more she treated me like I was fading wallpaper. A few weeks later, she introduced me to her fiancé. His name was Arif, tall, charming. The kind of man who smiled with too many teeth. "Mom," she said. "This is Arif. He's in finance. We're planning to get married next year." I smiled, polite, hiding the sting in my chest. He reached out to shake my hand and said, "It's a pleasure, Auntie. Alina's told me so much about you." I smiled again, pretending I didn't notice how he didn't meet my eyes for more than a second. They sat together on the sofa, talking in the soft, hurried tones of people who think their future is guaranteed. And though I smiled and nodded, something inside me whispered, "He's not kind." I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Like she was a trophy, not a partner. Or the way he interrupted her mid-sentence, correcting small things she said. But Alina didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. After he left that evening, I said gently, "He seems nice. But does he make you happy?" She laughed. That same dismissive laugh that used to belong to teenage rebellion, but now lived in adulthood's arrogance. "Mom, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "You don't know him. He's driven, confident. You wouldn't understand that kind of man." I bit my tongue. Because once, I had known exactly that kind of man. Her father. Over the next few months, things changed faster than I could catch up. Arif started coming over often, his voice filling the apartment like an unwelcome echo. He'd sit at the table, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing at me. When I tried to make conversation, he'd smile politely and say, "You should relax, Auntie. Let the young ones handle things." It was meant as kindness, but it landed like dismissal. Soon their conversations turned into whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. Money, investments, property. And one evening, while making tea, I overheard Alina say, "Mom still has that little house in Goldberg. Once she moves into assisted living, I'll just handle it. It's better if she doesn't deal with paperwork." My hand froze mid-stir. Handle it. That house was all I had. The one I'd built with my own savings, brick by humble brick. The one where every corner still carried the ghost of laughter and lullabies. My name was on that deed. But to her, it was just an asset. That night, I lay awake for hours, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of her laptop keys in the other room. I felt like a stranger in my own life. A mother turned bystander, a home turned burden. Days blurred into each other. She started talking about how expensive rent was, how she needed to consolidate assets. "Mom," she said one morning, "it's silly to keep that old house. You don't even live there anymore. We could sell it, invest the money, and secure your future." "My future?" I asked softly. She smiled like she was explaining something to a child. "Yes, Mom. Think about it. You'll be comfortable. I'll handle everything. You trust me, don't you? I looked at her face, confident, beautiful, unfamiliar. And I nodded. Because mothers always want to believe their children mean well. But inside, something twisted. A week later, she brought home a set of papers. Just sign these, she said casually. It's for the transfer. Don't worry, Arif's friend's a lawyer. It's standard. The papers trembled in my hands as I read the words. Property transfer of ownership. Alina, I said slowly. This puts everything in your name. She smiled, brushing it off. It's just easier for management, Mom. I'll take care of you, I promise. You'll always have a place with me. Her words were sweet, but her tone was final. As if I no longer had a choice. I need to think about it, I said quietly. Her smile faded. Mum, don't start this drama. I'm trying to help you. Her voice grew sharper, colder. You don't understand finances. This is what people do. Maybe so, I said softly. But people don't sell their mother's home while she's still breathing. She looked at me then, truly looked. And for the first time, I saw impatience turn into resentment. Mom, she said, her eyes narrowing, you should be grateful. Not everyone gets this kind of support. Support. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. I turned away, holding on to the edge of the counter for balance. My knees felt weak, but my heart was burning. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the darkness, and wondered how love could turn into something so cold without either of us noticing. Over the next few days, the tension grew thick enough to choke on. She spoke to me less. Arif spoke for her more. He'd call me Auntie, in that patronizing way, as if he were humoring a child. Once, I heard him say, you should really move her out soon. It's not good for our image. Our image. As if I were a stain that needed to be scrubbed from their future. But the worst came one morning when I overheard her on the phone. Her voice was low, angry. I told you, once the property's transferred, we'll have the capital. But she's being stubborn. Pause. No, she won't do anything. She's too old to fight. Too old to fight. Those words. They settled in my bones like frost. For days I walked around in silence, pretending not to hear, not to know. But deep inside, something was shifting, a slow awakening. One afternoon, while cleaning her desk, I found another set of papers. Already signed, already dated, and beside them, a printed email from her lawyer. The message read, once funds are cleared, proceed with property liquidation. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about my comfort. This was about control, about greed, about erasing me one signature at a time. That evening, she came home cheerful. Mom, I got us dinner, she said, holding 2 takeout boxes. I smiled, but my heart was quiet. She talked about her promotion, her new apartment. How she and Arif were thinking of buying a place together. And as she spoke, I realized something I hadn't before. She was building a life with the bricks I had bled for. And she didn't even see it. When she finished eating, she said casually, by the way, Arif's parents are coming next week. I think it's best if you, maybe stay with your friend Shazia for a while. Just so the place isn't crowded. Crowded? I asked, my voice trembling. She looked uncomfortable. Mom, you know how people are. They're traditional. They might not understand our living arrangement. Traditional. That was her new word for shame. I nodded slowly, holding my breath so she wouldn't hear it break. That night I packed a small bag. Just clothes and a few photographs. She didn't notice. She was too busy laughing with Arif on the balcony. As I looked at her from the hallway, tall, confident, radiant, I realized I was no longer part of her world. I was just the shadow that raised her. But what she didn't know was that even shadows can remember the light. And in the silence of that night, with my suitcase by the door and tears staining my pillow, I made myself a promise. If she wanted to erase me, she would have to face what she had created. Because I may have been old, yes, but pathetic. Not anymore. I wish I could tell you that things got better after that day. But they didn't. They got worse. Far worse than I ever imagined a mother's life could become. It started small, the kind of small that slips through cracks unnoticed. like the first drops of rain before a storm. Clara stopped talking to me except when she needed something. Groceries, errands, her dry cleaning, bills she'd forgotten to pay. At first, I told myself, she's just busy. But busy people don't roll their eyes when their mothers speak. Busy people don't slam doors when you ask if they're hungry. No, what Clara was tired of me. One night, I overheard her on the phone, pacing the hallway outside my room. Her voice was sharp, like broken glass. She just sits there all day. Do you know how depressing it is to come home to that? A pause. Yes, I know she's my mother, but it's exhausting. She's so pathetic. I can't describe the silence that followed. It wasn't just quiet. It was hollow. The kind of quiet where you realize something sacred has died. I lay there on my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe. I had been called many things in my life: stubborn, emotional, dramatic. But pathetic. That word pierced deeper than any knife. A few days later, Clara brought home a man. His name was Damien. He was handsome, confident, and had that slick charm that could convince you the sun rose just to see him smile. He shook my hand like it was a formality, not a connection. His eyes, cold, assessing, didn't linger long. Clara was glowing beside him, laughing, talking faster than usual. It reminded me of how she used to be before bitterness settled in. For a fleeting moment, I felt hope. Maybe he'd be good for her. But hope, I've learned, can be cruel. Over the weeks, I saw the small things, the way Damien spoke to her, the subtle jabs hidden behind smiles. Babe, you really shouldn't wear that color. It makes you look washed out. You're lucky I'm patient. Most men wouldn't put up with your mood swings. She'd laugh it off, but I saw it. The cracks. The way her shoulders tightened each time. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, mascara streaked down her face, a broken glass on the floor. Clara, I whispered. She jumped, startled. I'm fine, Mom. Just leave me alone. But I saw her wrist, red, faintly bruised. My heart clenched. Did he? Don't, she snapped. Don't you dare start your drama again. And just like that, I became the enemy once more. Days turned to weeks. Damien began to stay over more often, and slowly, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. He'd make little jokes about me. Morning, Queen Grandma, he'd say, smirking, sipping my tea. Or when I offered to help set the table, no, you just rest those old bones. Wouldn't want you breaking a hip. Clara would laugh, not out of joy, but obligation. I swallowed my pride, again and again, until the night it broke me. It was Clara's birthday. I had spent the whole week knitting her a shawl, pale lavender, her favorite color since she was a child. I even baked her favorite, lemon meringue pie, just like I used to when she came home from school crying about bullies. When she arrived home that night, she was radiant, new dress, new perfume, new attitude. Damien trailed behind her, holding a bottle of wine. Oh, Mom, she said, eyes scanning the table, the candles, the food. You did all this, I smiled, trembling. Of course, happy birthday. My love. She exchanged a glance with Damien. A smirk flickered between them. He leaned in and said softly, Sweetheart, we already had dinner reservations. Didn't we talk about that? My heart sank. Clara's smile faltered. Mom, we didn't think you'd. Well, we figured you'd just want to stay in. I thought, my voice cracked. I thought we'd celebrate together. Damien chuckled, low and cruel. You can't keep her tied to your apron forever, Mrs. Harding. The name. Mrs. Harding. He couldn't even call me Mom. Clara shifted awkwardly. Mom, please. Don't make this a big deal. But something inside me snapped. Years of quiet sacrifice, swallowed tears, endless patience. They all erupted in one trembling voice. I made you everything you are, Clara. Every meal, every dress, every chance you ever had. It came from these hands. I held them up, shaking. And now you sit there, ashamed of me. You let him mock me in my own house. Damien raised an eyebrow. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live. Give the young couple some space. Clara didn't protest. She just looked away. That silence, that cold, cowardly silence, was my undoing. 2 weeks later, I found my suitcase by the door. No note. No apology. Just a quiet betrayal wrapped in practicality. Clara said, "It's just until we figure things out, Mom." Damien's right, it's crowded here. Crowded. In the home I built. I didn't argue. I packed my shawl, my wedding photo, and the small Bible my husband gave me before he passed. I walked out without turning back. Because if I had, I might have broken completely. For the first time in 40 years, I had nowhere to go. I rented a single room in a run-down boarding house on the edge of town. The walls smelled of mildew and loneliness. The woman next door coughed through the night. The radiator hissed like it was angry to be alive. Every night, I sat by the small window and prayed for strength. Not for revenge. Just the courage to keep breathing. Then one morning, as I went to collect my mail, I saw an envelope. Unmarked, no return address. Inside was a photo, Clara, her eyes swollen, lips split. And beneath it, a note in trembling handwriting, "Mom, I need you." I didn't hesitate. I took the first bus back to the city, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the ticket. When I reached her apartment, I knocked once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Finally the door opened. And there she was. My daughter. My baby. But she wasn't the same. Her eyes were hollow, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom," she said, and before I could speak, she fell into my arms, sobbing. Damien was gone. Disappeared after draining her bank account and leaving behind debts in her name. She'd lost her job, her home, her pride. And suddenly, she was the one who needed saving. That night, as she slept on my lap like she did when she was a child, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt awake. I realized that love, real love, doesn't mean letting people destroy you. It means knowing when to stand up, when to draw a line, even with your own flesh and blood. Because if you let them break you, you teach them that it's okay. And I wasn't going to teach that anymore. The next morning, I kissed her forehead and said quietly, "We'll get through this. But this time, I'll lead. Not as your mother, but as a woman who's finally found her strength." And for the first time in years, I saw her eyes soften with respect. When dawn crept through the curtains that morning, it wasn't soft or gentle. It was bright, almost defiant, as if the sun itself refused to let me hide anymore. I sat by the edge of the bed, watching Clara breathe, her face bruised with the shadow of mistakes that had finally come home to roost. Her lashes were wet with dried tears. She looked younger when she slept. Almost like my little girl again. For the first time in months, there was peace in her face. And I realized something painful and true. We both needed saving, just in different ways. The next few days blurred together. I cooked, cleaned, and nursed her back to strength, just as I did when she had chickenpox at 8 years old. Only this time, the sickness wasn't on her skin. It was inside her. Sometimes, she'd just stare into space, whispering, "How could I have been so blind?" I never said, "I told you so." Because mothers don't gloat when their children break. They gather the pieces quietly and start again. Still, I'd catch myself drifting back to the day she threw me out. The sound of my suitcase scraping across the floor echoing in my mind. There were moments I wanted to shout, to make her feel the ache she'd given me. But healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from dignity. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there stood a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Mrs. Harding?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Angela. I work at the Women's Support Center. Your daughter reached out to us last week." Clara peeked from behind the door, her face flushing with shame. Angela smiled gently. "We're not here to judge, sweetheart. Just to help you rebuild." Rebuild. That word hit me like a prayer. Because that's exactly what we both needed. Rebuilding. Not just her life, but mine. Angela became more than a counselor. She became a mirror. One that showed me all the strength I had buried beneath decades of guilt and silence. During our first meeting, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You've spent your life being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's caretaker. When was the last time you were someone to yourself?" The question startled me. I didn't have an answer. For years, I defined myself by what I gave, not by who I was. Angela leaned back and smiled. It's never too late to start again. You've survived the hardest part. Realizing your worth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in my mind. When was the last time you were someone to yourself? In the days that followed, I began small. I walked to the market by myself, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I bought a bar of lavender soap. The expensive kind Clara used to tell me was a waste of money. And when I took my bath that night, the scent filled the room like peace itself. It wasn't much, but for me it was a beginning. Meanwhile, Clara began attending therapy. She started volunteering at the same women's center that had helped her escape Damien's grip. I watched her change, slowly, cautiously, like a wounded bird learning to fly again. There were days she'd come home quiet, haunted by memories she couldn't yet forgive herself for. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch and whispered, "Mom, I don't know how to live with what I did to you." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were softer now, no longer sharp with judgment or pride. "You live with it," I said gently, "by doing better. Every day." She nodded, tears glistening in the fading sunlight. And for the first time in a long time, she took my hand, not out of guilt, but love. But life has a way of testing new beginnings. A month later, a letter arrived, thick paper, expensive ink. It was from Damien's lawyer. Apparently, Damien had been charged with fraud and assault. The authorities needed Clara to testify against him, not just as a victim, but as a witness to his financial crimes. If she didn't, she could be held responsible for some of the debts he left behind. The color drained from her face as she read. "Mom, I can't face him again." I took the letter from her trembling hands. "Yes, you can," I said, "and you will. Because this time, you won't be standing there alone." The court date came faster than we expected. When we walked into that room, the air was heavy. Not just with judgment, but with memory. Damien sat across from us, his arrogance still intact, though the charm had faded. He smirked when he saw Clara, like he still held power over her. But then he saw me, standing tall beside her, dressed in a clean cream coat, hair pinned neatly, eyes steady. And his smirk faltered. The prosecutor began questioning him about the forged documents, the stolen funds, the threats. Damien denied it all, of course, the lies dripping from his tongue like honey gone sour. Then came Clara's turn. Her hands shook as she took the stand. But when she looked at me, I nodded once, just like I used to when she was a child, about to recite her school poem. "Ms. Harding," the judge said, "please tell us what happened." She took a deep breath. "At first, I thought he loved me. He told me I was too good for everyone else. He made me believe that my mother was holding me back." Her voice cracked. "I pushed her away because of him. I thought he wanted to protect me. But he wanted to control me. And when I tried to leave, She stopped, tears welling. "Take your time," the judge said softly. Clara wiped her eyes. "He hit me. Then he drained my accounts and vanished. I lost everything, except her." She turned toward me. "My mother never stopped loving me, even when I didn't deserve it." There was silence in the courtroom, the kind that carries more weight than any sound. When it was Damien's turn to speak again, his words fell flat. His lies no longer held shape, because truth has a way of standing tall, even when spoken through trembling lips. Afterward, as we stepped outside, the cold wind brushed against our faces, but for once, it didn't sting. Clara took a deep breath and whispered, "I feel free." I smiled faintly. Freedom is like forgiveness. You don't wait to be ready. You just choose it. In the weeks that followed, we began to rebuild, truly rebuild. Clara found a job at the Women's Center as a full-time advocate. I started volunteering there too, helping older women who'd been silenced by life, by family, by fear. Angela often said, "You two are the heart of this place." But I didn't see it as heroism. It was redemption, quiet and earned. One afternoon, while sorting donations, I found an old knitting set in a box. The same brand I used to use. Angela smiled when she saw me holding it. "Maybe it's time you brought back something that's just yours." That night, I began knitting again. But not for Clara this time, for myself. A simple scarf, warm and deep blue, the color of strength. As I worked, I thought of all the years I'd given away. My youth, my energy, my silence. And for once, I didn't feel regret. I felt gratitude, because pain had been my teacher. And forgiveness, my reward. A few months later, Clara and I moved into a small cottage outside town. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. We planted a garden in the back. Tomatoes, roses, and lavender. Always lavender. Every morning, I'd sit by the window with my tea, the scent of earth and blossoms rising with the dawn. And Clara would come out barefoot, hair still messy, and say, "Mom, we should add mint next season." I'd laugh softly. "Yes, darling. Mint would be nice." Sometimes, she still apologizes. Sometimes, she cries when she remembers how cruel she once was. And every time, I tell her the same thing. We can't change the past, Clara, but we can choose what we do with the pain it gave us. And she'll smile through her tears and say, "You're stronger than anyone I know." But the truth is, I'm just a woman who finally learned that love, real love, doesn't mean losing yourself. It means standing tall, even when your knees tremble. It means forgiving, but not forgetting, and it means building peace, even from ruins. That night, as the stars blinked over our quiet little home, I whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for what I lost, but for what I found through losing it. Because the world had called me old and pathetic. But now I knew better. I was wise, I was free. And I was finally, completely, myself. The months that followed the trial felt like walking out of a long, dark tunnel and blinking into sunlight. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of disappointment pressing on my chest. But peace, peace, doesn't arrive like a gift. It's something you build, one brave breath at a time. And though the storm had passed, its echoes still lingered. Clara and I were healing, yes. But some nights, I'd catch her sitting by the window, staring into the distance, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share. I knew that silence. I had lived it. It was the sound of guilt. One evening, after dinner, I found her outside, barefoot in the garden, her hands buried in the soil. The sun was setting behind her, and she looked almost fragile in that light. "Planting something?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Trying to," she said softly. "But nothing seems to grow right here. The ground's too dry." I stepped closer and knelt beside her, pressing my fingers into the same earth. "Sometimes," I said, "the soil needs time to remember it can bloom again." As she turned to me then, eyes glassy with tears, "Mom, will you ever really forgive me?" I smiled gently. "Sweetheart, forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a path we walk together, every day." She nodded, and for a long moment, we just sat there, two women who had broken each other and still chose to heal side by side. A week later, Angela called from the Women's Center. "Mrs. Harding," she said, "we're organizing a community event, a panel for survivors and advocates to share their stories. We'd love for you and Clara to speak." Me? Speak? The very thought made my heart race. I wasn't a storyteller. I was just a mother who survived heartbreak. But Angela's words lingered. "You never know who needs to hear your voice." That night, I told Clara about it. Her face lit up, nervous but hopeful. "Mom, maybe we should. Maybe it's time we stop hiding." And so we agreed. The day of the event arrived with the scent of spring, rain on new leaves, lilacs blooming along the fences. The community hall was small but full. Women of every age, each carrying stories in their eyes. Clara spoke first. Her voice trembled at the start, but soon steadied, growing strong and sure. "I thought love meant giving up everything for someone," she said. "But real love doesn't demand your silence. It doesn't hurt you and call it care." People nodded, tears glistening across faces. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, gripping the podium. I once believed that being a good mother meant never saying no. That love meant sacrifice, even of myself. But I learned the hardest way that when you let people erase you, you teach them that you're not worth remembering. A hush fell over the room. I looked at Clara. Her eyes met mine, proud, tearful, whole. "I'm not here to tell you I was perfect," I continued. "I made mistakes. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I forgave when I should have walked away. But I learned that it's never too late to stand up. not just for your children, but for yourself. When I finished, the applause came slowly, not loud, but deep, the kind of applause that comes from hearts that understand. After the event, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her voice shook as she said, "Mom, your story, it gave me courage. I've been afraid to leave someone who hurts me. But hearing you, I think I can now." She hugged me before I could even respond. And in that moment, I understood what Angela meant. You never know who needs your voice. Later that night, back at our little cottage, Clara and I sat by the fire. "Mom," she said softly, "I saw Dad in my dreams last night. He was smiling. Do you think he'd forgive me too?" I looked into the flames, the orange light dancing like memory. "I think he already has," I said. "He loved you too much not to." She smiled, small but real. Then, almost shyly, she asked, "Do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" I laughed, a soft, surprised sound. "At my age." She shrugged. "You deserve someone who sees you, who listens." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I already found someone who does." She frowned playfully. "Ooh," I smiled. "Me?" That spring was the most beautiful one I can remember. We filled the garden with mint and lavender, just as she'd promised. The roses bloomed red and full, their petals soft as forgiveness. And on quiet evenings, when the air was sweet and golden, we'd sit outside, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. One evening, Clara leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You know, Mom, I used to think your strength came from never breaking, but now I see, it came from breaking and still standing." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. Because she was right. A few months later, Angela invited us to mentor new women at the center. Some were mothers, some daughters, all trying to stitch their lives back together. I listened to their stories and realized how many of us walk the same path, just in different shoes. We give too much. We forgive too soon. We confuse love with endurance. But the truth is, love should never hurt more than it heals. The last time I visited the courthouse, it wasn't for pain, it was for closure. Damien had been sentenced, 5 years. Fraud, assault, coercion. When the judge read the verdict, Clara held my hand so tightly it trembled. As we walked out into the sunlight, I said quietly, "Justice isn't revenge, Clara, it's balance. The world finding its way back to right." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me." I smiled. "That's what mothers do. But the rest, that's what women do. We rise." That evening, I took out my knitting again. The same blue scarf I'd been working on for months. It was nearly done now. Each stitch held a memory: heartbreak, endurance, forgiveness, hope. When I finished it, I wrapped it around my shoulders and stepped outside. The stars were bright. Brighter than I'd ever seen them. The night smelled of mint and rain, and the garden glistened like silver under the moonlight. Clara joined me, her hair loose, her smile easy. We stood there in silence for a long while. Then she said softly, "Mom, I'm proud of you." I turned to her, my throat tight with emotion. "I'm proud of us." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the road we'd traveled. From betrayal to truth, from silence to strength. And I realized something simple but profound: life doesn't give us what we deserve. It gives us what we're brave enough to claim. I'd been called old, useless, pathetic. But those words no longer had power over me. Because I'd built something stronger than their cruelty. I had built peace. From the ashes of pain. Sometimes the people we love the most will be the ones to hurt us the deepest. But pain is not the end. It's the beginning of understanding your worth. Forgive, but don't forget who you are. And never let anyone make you feel small for surviving. True love, the kind that saves, begins when you finally learn to love yourself. That's my story, dear ones. The story of how I lost everything and found myself. Now tell me, what would you have done in my place? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.